The flashing red and blue lights danced across the night, illuminating the parked car by the side of the road. Mrs. Evelyn Carter sat frozen in the driver's seat, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. Two officers stood outside her window, their faces cold and unyielding. "Step out of the vehicle," one of them barked, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. Mrs. Carter hesitated. "Officer, may I ask why?" "I didn't do anything wrong." The second officer, taller and bulkier, leaned closer. "We said, step out. Don't make us repeat ourselves." She unbuckled her seatbelt slowly, heart pounding. As she opened the door, the taller officer grabbed her arm roughly. "What are you doing in this neighborhood at this time of night?" he asked, his tone accusatory. "I live here," Mrs. Carter replied firmly, though her voice wavered slightly. They ignored her. One officer began searching her car, flipping through her belongings as if they were trash. He tossed her purse onto the ground, its contents spilling out. A few dollars, a small notebook, her phone, and an old photograph of her son. "Is this your son?" The taller officer sneered, picking up the picture. "He doesn't look like he belongs around here either." Mrs. Carter bit her tongue. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "He's the police commissioner," she said quietly. Both officers paused for a moment, then exchanged a look of disbelief. The taller one smirked. "Nice try, lady. You think dropping some big title is gonna get you off the hook?" Before she could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" The officers turned, and their confident expressions crumbled in an instant. There he stood, Commissioner Marcus Carter, tall and imposing, with his badge gleaming under the streetlights. His face was a mix of controlled fury and disbelief. "You two," he said it in a low, dangerous voice. "Explain yourselves, now." The officers stammered, their earlier bravado gone. "Sir, we were conducting a routine stop. She was acting suspicious." "Suspicious?" Marcus interrupted, his voice rising. "That's my mother you've got handcuffed." The officers' faces drained of color. Mrs. Carter stood quietly, her wrists bound, watching as her son's presence transformed the scene. Marcus's eyes burned with intensity. "Take those cuffs off her, immediately." Neither officer moved, as if frozen by their mistake. "Do it now," Marcus snapped, his voice commanding and final. The taller officer scrambled to unlock the cuffs, fumbling as he avoided looking Mrs. Carter in the eye. Once her hands were free, she rubbed her wrists, but her gaze remained steady, unbroken. Marcus stepped closer to the officers, his towering presence forcing them to shrink back. "I want a full report on this incident by morning," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "And trust me, this isn't over." The tension was palpable, the night air thick with the weight of the moment. The officers looked as though they wished they could disappear, but Marcus wasn't done. His voice dropped lower, a quiet fury barely restrained. "Do you have any idea who you just disrespected? Not only as a citizen, but as a person." The officers stuttered apologies, but Marcus raised a hand to silence them. "Save it. You'll have your chance to explain to Internal Affairs." The cliffhanger hung in the air. What would Internal Affairs uncover about these officers? Would this incident spark a larger investigation into their conduct, or was there more to their actions than met the eye? Marcus knew this was just the beginning. Earlier that day, Mrs. Carter had been in her garden, tending to her roses. She had always found solace among the vibrant blooms, a peaceful routine that helped her cope with the fast-paced world her son navigated. At 62, Evelyn Carter carried herself with grace, her silver-streaked hair always neatly pinned, her warm eyes often sparkling with kindness. Her son Marcus had called her that morning. "Mom, how are you doing?" he asked, his deep voice filled with warmth. "I'm fine, Marcus. Just enjoying my garden. How's work?" "Busy as always," he replied, "but I'll need time to see you soon. Promise." Later that evening, she had decided to visit a friend across town. As she drove through the quiet streets, she didn't notice the patrol car trailing her. When the sirens blared and the lights flashed, she felt her heart sink but remained calm. She had done nothing wrong. But as soon as the officers approached her car, the tension in the air shifted. Their tone, their body language, it was clear they had made assumptions about her, assumptions rooted in prejudice. The initial questioning was invasive, their suspicion unwarranted. They asked where she was going, why she was out at night, and if the car was hers. Despite her calm explanations, their distrust only grew. It escalated when they demanded to search her car. "Officer, I don't consent to a search without a warrant," she had said firmly. That was when the situation turned hostile. The taller officer accused her of being uncooperative, and, before she knew it, she was pulled out of the car and handcuffed. Her protests fell on deaf ears. Now, back in the present, Marcus stood firm, his mother by his side. The officers had retreated, and the neighborhood had grown quiet again, but the damage was done. Marcus clenched his fists, vowing to uncover the truth behind this injustice. This wasn't just about his mother. It was about every person who had faced similar treatment but lacked the power or connections to fight back. Marcus knew this was the start of something bigger, and he was ready to see it through. But as the night unfolded, an unexpected twist loomed on the horizon, one that would shake Marcus to his core. As the patrol car sped off, leaving Marcus and his mother standing under the dim streetlights, the weight of the incident settled over them. Mrs. Carter, ever composed, patted her son's arm. "Marcus, it's okay," she said softly, though her voice wavered. "I'm all right now." Marcus shook his head, his jaw clenched. "No, Mom, it's not okay. What I did was wrong, and they're going to answer for it." He opened the car door for her and ensured she was seated comfortably before sliding into the driver's seat himself. His mind raced as he drove back to her house, every passing streetlight illuminating the storm brewing within him. Once they arrived, Mrs. Carter went straight to the kitchen. "Let me make you some tea," she offered, a coping mechanism she had relied on for years. But Marcus wasn't in the mood for tea. "Mom," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You've been through enough tonight. Sit down. We need to talk." She hesitated, then complied, taking a seat at the kitchen table. Marcus paced the room, his hands gesturing as he spoke. "This isn't just about you or tonight. Those officers didn't even flinch when you told them who you were. They've probably done this to others, people who don't have someone like me to call." Mrs. Carter watched her son, her heart aching. "I know you want to fix this, Marcus, but you also need to be careful. You're up against the system, not just two bad officers." "I'm aware, Mom, but if we don't challenge the system, who will?" Before she could respond, Marcus's phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up and saw a message from Chief Inspector Barnes, his second in command. "Commissioner, we need you back at HQ. Something's come up." Marcus frowned, his instincts immediately on high alert. It was well past midnight, and any call at this hour usually meant trouble. "I have to go," he told his mother, grabbing his coat. "Lock the doors and don't answer for anyone but me." Mrs. Carter nodded, worry etched on her face. "Be safe, Marcus." He kissed her forehead and left, his mind already shifting gears. The drive to police headquarters was swift, the streets eerily quiet. When he arrived, Barnes was waiting in his office. "What's the emergency?" Marcus asked, his voice sharp. Barnes handed him a file. "We've had several complaints about those two officers, Jones and Petrov. Tonight's incident isn't their first. We got reports of excessive force, racial profiling, and even tampering with evidence." Marcus's grip tightened on the file. "Why wasn't I informed about this earlier?" Barnes looked uncomfortable. "The complaints were buried, sir. It seems someone higher up has been protecting them." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Barnes hesitated, then said, "Deputy Chief Reynolds." Marcus's stomach sank. Reynolds had been in the force for decades, known for his old-school methods and connections. If he was involved, this was more than just a couple of rogue officers. It was systemic. "I want a full investigation," Marcus ordered. "Pull every complaint, every report they've filed, and bring Reynolds in for questioning." Barnes nodded. "Understood, sir." As Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind raced. He knew this would be a battle, and it wouldn't be easy, but he was prepared to face whatever came next. Just as he was about to leave, Barnes added, "One more thing, Commissioner. We've had a tip-off about something bigger. A potential cover-up involving these officers and a case from last year. It might explain why Reynolds has been protecting them." Marcus's eyes sharpened. "What case?" Barnes handed over another file. "The Lewis case, a young black man who went missing after a routine traffic stop." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard of the case, Joshua Lewis, a college student whose disappearance had sparked protests and demands for justice. The case had gone cold, but now new evidence was surfacing. "If this is connected," Marcus said, his voice low, "we're dealing with something far more dangerous." Barnes nodded. "We're pulling in the officers for questioning first thing in the morning. But, sir, you might want to prepare yourself. This could get ugly." Marcus left the station, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The Lewis case had been a thorn in the department's side, a symbol of the community's mistrust in law enforcement. If Jones and Petrov were involved, and Reynolds had been covering for them, this could unravel years of corruption. He arrived home just as dawn was breaking, the first light of day casting long shadows on the pavement. Exhausted but determined, he sat in his living room, reviewing the files. Each page revealed more of the tangled web of lies and misconduct. As he pieced together the evidence, a chilling realization hit him. This wasn't just about corruption, it was about power and control. And now that he was taking, he knew they would come after him. The sun rose higher, and Marcus made a decision. He would hold a press conference to address the incident involving his mother and announce the investigation into the Lewis case. The community deserved to know the truth. Later that morning, he stood before a room packed with reporters. Cameras flashed as he began to speak, his voice steady and resolute. Last night, my mother was subjected to an unjust and racially motivated stop by 2 officers under my command. This incident, while deeply personal, highlights a larger issue within our department, an issue I intend to address head-on. He paused, letting his words sink in. Effective immediately, we are launching a full investigation into these officers and their actions. Additionally, new evidence has come to light regarding the disappearance of Joshua Lewis. This department will not rest until we uncover the truth and deliver justice. The room erupted with questions, but Marcus remained composed. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but he was ready. As the press conference ended, Marcus returned to his office, where Barnes was waiting. "Good job out there," Barnes said, "but you should know, we've received threats already." Marcus nodded. "Let them threaten. They're scared because they know their time is up." But as he spoke, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message with no sender, just a single line of text that made his blood run cold. "Back off or your family won't be safe." Marcus stared at the screen, his resolve hardening. The battle had just begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. Marcus sat still, staring at the message on his phone. The words glared back at him like a venomous threat. "Back off, or your family won't be safe." His pulse quickened, but his face remained calm. If whoever sent this thought intimidation would work, they were wrong. He took a deep breath and stood, his phone still in his hand. "Barnes," he said, his voice steady. "We have a problem." Barnes walked over, and Marcus handed him the phone. The chief inspector's eyes narrowed as he read the message. "This is serious," he said. "We need to trace this immediately." "I'll forward it to cyber crimes," Marcus replied. "But we need to keep this quiet for now. If word gets out, it'll compromise everything." Barnes nodded. "Understood, sir. But you know this means they're watching." Marcus clenched his fists. "Let them watch. We won't stop." Despite his outward confidence, the threat lingered in his mind. His thoughts immediately went to his mother. She had already been through enough, and now this? He couldn't let fear dictate his actions, but he also couldn't ignore the danger. He grabbed his coat. "I'm going home to check on my mom. Keep me updated on the investigation." "Will do," Barnes said, "and Commissioner, stay alert." As Marcus drove through the city, his eyes scanned the streets for anything unusual. A car following too closely, a stranger lingering on a corner. Paranoia wasn't something he often indulged in, but today was different. When he arrived at his mother's house, she greeted him at the door, her expression concerned. "Marcus, you're back early." "Just wanted to see how you're doing," he said, stepping inside. He glanced around, noting the locked windows and drawn curtains. "Have you been getting any strange calls or messages?" Mrs. Carter frowned. "No, why? What's going on?" Marcus hesitated, not wanting to alarm her. "It's nothing to worry about, just some precautions I need you to take. Don't open the door for anyone you don't know, and if you see anything suspicious, call me immediately." Mrs. Carter's eyes searched his face. "Marcus, I know when you're holding something back. Is this about last night?" "In part," he admitted, "but I'm handling it." She sighed and placed a hand on his arm. "I trust you, but promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," he said, though the weight of his words felt heavier than usual. After ensuring his mother was safe, Marcus returned to the station. His mind was already working through the next steps. He needed to put pressure on Reynolds and his cronies before they had a chance to regroup. When he entered his office, Barnes was waiting with an update. "Sir, we've pulled every complaint linked to Jones and Petrov. It's worse than we thought. Multiple instances of excessive force and racial profiling, all swept under the rug. And as for Reynolds, he's tied to every cover-up." Marcus nodded grimly. "We need him in here now." Barnes picked up the phone and made the call. 10 minutes later, Deputy Chief Reynolds walked into Marcus's office, his face a mix of defiance and feigned confusion. "You wanted to see me, Commissioner?" Reynolds asked, his tone casual. "Have a seat," Marcus said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Once Reynolds was seated, Marcus leaned forward. "We need to talk about Jones and Petrov." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "What about them?" "Don't play dumb," Marcus said sharply. "We know you've been protecting them. We've uncovered a pattern of misconduct, and every time a complaint was filed, it conveniently disappeared under your watch." Reynolds shrugged. "I've been in this department a long time, Carter. Sometimes complaints are baseless. You know how it is." Marcus slammed a file down on the desk. "Save it. The evidence speaks for itself. You've been covering for them, and now it's come back to haunt you." Reynolds' face darkened. "Careful, Commissioner. Accusations like that can ruin careers." "Only if they're false," Marcus shot back. "But this will ruin yours because it's the truth." Reynolds leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "You don't know what you're getting into, Carter. This department has its own way of handling things. You start poking around where you don't belong, and it won't end well for you." Marcus stared him down, unflinching. "Is that a threat?" Reynolds smirked. "Just a friendly warning." Marcus stood, towering over Reynolds. "Consider this your last day of freedom. Internal Affairs will be questioning you, and if you're smart, you'll cooperate. Otherwise, you'll be looking at charges that'll make you wish you'd retired years ago." Reynolds rose, his smirk fading. "You think you're untouchable, Carter, but you'll learn soon enough. Everyone has a breaking point." As Reynolds walked out, Marcus felt a chill. The man wasn't bluffing. He was dangerous, and now he was cornered. But Marcus couldn't back down, not when justice was on the line. Later that evening, Marcus sat in his office, reviewing the latest updates on the Lewis case. The deeper he dug, the more it became clear that Jones and Petrov's involvement was no coincidence. The traffic stop that led to Joshua Lewis's disappearance had been under Reynolds' direct supervision. A knock on the door broke his concentration. It was Barnes, his face grim. "Commissioner, we got a problem." "What now?" Marcus asked. "Jones and Petrov didn't show up for their shift today," Barnes said, "and their patrol car was found abandoned near the city docks." Marcus's stomach tightened. "They're running?" Barnes nodded. "Looks like it. We've already issued a BOO, but if they've gone underground, it won't be easy finding them." Marcus stood, his mind racing. "We'll find them, and when we do, they'll answer for everything." But even as he spoke, a new worry crept in. If Jones and Petrov were desperate enough to run, they might also be desperate enough to tie up loose ends, and that loose end could be him, or worst, his mother. Just then, his phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. "Tick-tock, Commissioner. Time's running out." Marcus felt a surge of anger and determination. Whoever was behind this, they were playing a dangerous game, and he was ready to see it through to the end. But as night fell, a new twist was about to unfold, one that would change everything. The dim glow of the city lights cast long shadows across Marcus's office as he stared at the chilling message on his phone. "Tick-tock, Commissioner. Time's running out." It was clear now. Whoever was orchestrating this was not only watching but also escalating their threats. He couldn't ignore the possibility that his mother or someone close to him could be targeted. Barnes leaned in. "Sir, we traced the message to a burner phone. No luck tracking its exact location." Marcus nodded, his mind calculating. "They're trying to rattle us. But if they're using burner phones, they've got something bigger to hide." Before Barnes could respond, Marcus's desk phone buzzed. It was Officer Lopes from Cybercrimes. "Commissioner, we've been monitoring chatter on some encrypted channels. There's talk about a cleanup crew being activated." "Cleanup crew," Marcus repeated, his voice laced with urgency. "Yes, sir," Lopes confirmed. "It sounds like Jones and Petrov might not just be running. Someone could be planning to silence them for good." Marcus exchanged a grave look with Barnes. "If that's true, we need to find them before their own people do." Barnes nodded. "I'll mobilize a search team. We'll comb the docks and surrounding areas." "Good," Marcus said, "but be discreet. If whoever's behind this gets wind of our search, they'll make sure Jones and Petrov disappear permanently." As Barnes let to organize the team, Marcus felt a growing unease. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous this web of corruption became, and now lives were at stake, including his own. Just then, his phone rang again, this time showing an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Commissioner Carter." A distorted voice crackled through the line. "Commissioner, you've been quite busy." Marcus's grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this?" "Let's just say I'm someone who values discretion," the voice replied, laced with mockery. "You're in over your head, Carter. You should have stayed in your lane." Marcus's jaw clenched. "If you think threats will stop me, you're mistaken." The voice chuckled darkly. "It's not a threat, Commissioner. It's a guarantee. You've made powerful enemies, and they don't like loose ends. Walk away while you still can." "Not happening," Marcus said firmly. "I'm going to expose every last one of you." The voice grew cold. "Suit yourself. But remember, you were warned." "Tick-tock, Commissioner." The line went dead. Marcus set the phone down, his mind racing. Whoever this was, they had resources, and weren't afraid to use them. But he couldn't let fear dictate his actions. He was committed to seeing this through, no matter the cost. Minutes later, Barnes returned, his face grim. "Sir, we got something." A dock worker spotted two men matching Jones and Petrov's description boarding a cargo ship. Marcus grabbed his coat. "Let's move." The docks were a maze of towering shipping containers and dimly lit pathways. The air was thick with the smell of salt and diesel. Marcus, Barnes, and a team of officers moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. According to the dock worker, they boarded a ship called the Horizon, Barnes said, pointing toward a massive freighter docked at the end of the pier. Marcus nodded. "Let's split up. We need to cover as much ground as possible." As the team fanned out, Marcus and Barnes headed toward the Horizon. The sound of waves lapping against the hull echoed in the stillness. They climbed the gangplank and stepped onto the ship's deck, their footsteps muffled by the thick metal beneath them. "Jones, Petrov," Marcus called out, his voice firm. "This is Commissioner Carter. We know you're here. Come out and we'll ensure your safety." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a faint noise, a shuffle of feet, came from below deck. "They're down there," Barnes whispered. They descended the narrow staircase, their flashlights illuminating the cramped passageway. At the end of the corridor, they found a small storage room. Marcus pushed the door open, revealing Jones and Petrov huddled in the corner, their faces pale and their eyes wide with fear. "Commissioner," Jones stammered, "you have to help us. They're after us." "Who's they?" Marcus demanded, his voice steady but firm. "The same people who made us do it," Petrov said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Lewis case, we didn't have a choice." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Start talking. Now." Before they could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Barnes raised his weapon, his eyes darting toward the noise. "We got company." Suddenly, the door to the storage room slammed shut, and the sound of a locking mechanism engaged from the outside. Marcus and Barnes exchanged a quick glance before Marcus shouted, "Who's out there?" No response came, but the heavy footsteps retreated quickly. Marcus rushed to the door, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. "Trap," Barnes muttered. Then a hissing sound filled the room. Marcus's eyes darted to the ceiling vents, where a thick white gas began to pour in. "Gas," Marcus yelled. "Cover your mouths." Jones and Petrov scrambled to tear strips from their clothing, while Marcus and Barnes did the same. They pressed the fabric to their faces, but the gas was thick and fast spreading. Marcus pulled out his radio. "Team, we're trapped below deck. We need immediate extraction." Static crackled in response, followed by a faint voice. "On our way, Commissioner. Hold tight." The gas was disorienting, burning their throats and eyes. Marcus felt his vision blur as he tried to stay focused. He couldn't let it end like this. Not here, not now. Just as his knees began to buckle, the sound of metal grinding against metal filled the room. The door burst open, and a team of officers rushed in, gas masks on and weapons drawn. "Commissioner, let's go," one of them shouted. Marcus, Barnes, Jones, and Petrov were quickly escorted out of the room and onto the deck, where the fresh night air hit them like a wave of relief. Marcus took deep breaths, his vision slowly clearing. But the danger wasn't over yet. As they regrouped, an explosion rocked the far end of the ship, sending a plume of fire and smoke into the night sky. The force of the blast knocked them off their feet, and the ship's alarm blared. "Everyone off the ship," Marcus ordered, his voice hoarse. Officers scrambled to evacuate as the flames spread. Marcus and Barnes helped Jones and Petrov down the gangplank, their escape hastened by the threat of another explosion. Once they were safely on the dock, Marcus turned to Barnes, his face grim. This wasn't just about silencing them. They wanted to send a message. Barnes nodded, and they'd made it clear they're willing to burn everything down to cover their tracks. Marcus stared at the burning ship, the flames reflecting in his eyes. This was no longer just an investigation. It was a war, and he was ready to fight. The inferno engulfing, the horizon crackled and roared, casting an eerie glow over the docks. The acrid stench of burning metal and fuel filled the air as Marcus watched firefighters battle the blaze. His mind raced. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a deliberate attempt to destroy evidence and intimidate him. Jones and Petrov sat on the curb, coughing and shaking. Their pale faces told a story of fear and regret. Marcus crouched in front of them, his voice low but commanding. "You two have a lot of explaining to do. Start talking, or the next time someone tries to kill you, we might not get there in time." Petrov's eyes darted nervously, his voice cracking. "They'll kill us if we say anything. You don't know what they're capable of." Marcus leaned in closer, his tone unyielding. "And if you stay silent, you'll spend the rest of your lives running from shadows. The only way out of this is through me. Now, tell me everything." Jones hesitated, then sighed, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "It started with the Lewis case," he began. "We were told to pull Joshua over, make it look routine. But things went wrong. He panicked and ran, and then he disappeared." Petrov interjected, his voice trembling. "We didn't kill him. I swear. But after that night, we were ordered to keep our mouths shut. Reynolds said it was for the greater good." Marcus's jaw tightened. "And the cover-up?" Jones nodded. "Reynolds had the resources. He made sure the reports were buried. Witnesses intimidated, evidence erased. We didn't have a choice. He said if we didn't cooperate, we'd end up like Joshua." The weight of their words settled over Marcus like a heavy fog. He had suspected corruption, but hearing it confirmed was something else entirely. "What about tonight?" he pressed. "Who locked us in that room? Who's behind the threats?" Petrov shook his head. "We don't know. It's bigger than Reynolds. There are people higher up, people who control everything from the shadows." Before Marcus could probe further, Barnes approached, his expression grim. "Commissioner, we got a situation. The explosion wasn't just to destroy the ship. It was meant to lure us here." Marcus's brow furrowed. "Explain." Barnes held up his phone, showing a live feed from police headquarters. Officers were scrambling as alarms blared. "There's been a break-in at HQ. They'd targeted the evidence locker." Marcus felt a surge of adrenaline. "They're trying to clean house." Barnes nodded. "Whoever they are, they're moving fast. If they don't get back there now, we'll lose everything." Marcus turned back to Jones and Petrov. "You're coming with us. You'll be safer at HQ, and I'm not letting you out of my sight." The group piled into their vehicles and sped toward headquarters. Marcus's mind raced. The break-in was a bold move, a sign that whoever was behind this wasn't afraid of the police. But it also meant they were desperate, willing to take risks to cover their tracks. When they arrived, the scene was chaotic. Officers were securing the perimeter, and Barnes led the way inside. The evidence locker was a mess. Locks broken, shelves overturned, files scattered across the floor. "How much did they take?" Marcus asked. An officer handed him a clipboard. "So far, it looks like they targeted specific cases. Anything connected to Joshua Lewis and the officers involved." Marcus scanned the list, his suspicions confirmed. "They knew exactly what to look for," he said. "This wasn't random." Barnes nodded. "They got someone on the inside." Marcus clenched his fists. "We're running out of time. If we don't find out who's behind this soon, more people will get hurt." As they combed through the wreckage, Marcus's phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "You're persistent, Commissioner, but persistence has its limits. Walk away or your loved ones will suffer." Marcus's face darkened. He showed the message to Barnes, who cursed under his breath. "They're doubling down." "Good," Marcus said, his voice cold. "Because so am I." The hours that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus and his team worked tirelessly, piecing together what little evidence remained. Jones and Petrov were placed in protective custody, though their safety was far from guaranteed. As dawn broke, Marcus sat in his office, exhaustion weighing on him. But he couldn't rest, not yet. He replayed the events in his mind, searching for any detail they might have missed. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Barnes, holding a small USB drive. "Sir, we found this hidden in one of the overturned shelves. It's labeled Lewis." Marcus took the drive, a spark of hope igniting within him. "Let's see what's on it." They inserted the drive into a secure computer. The screen flickered to life, revealing a series of documents and videos. Marcus's eyes widened as he realized what they had found. "This is it," he said. "Proof of the cover-up." The documents detailed the orders given to Jones and Petrov, signed by Reynolds and other high-ranking officials. The videos showed damning footage from the night Joshua disappeared, including conversations that implicated not just Reynolds, but others within the department. Barnes let out a low whistle. "This is explosive. With this, we can bring them down." Marcus nodded, determination hardening his resolve. "But we have to act fast. Once they realize we have this, they'll stop at nothing to destroy it." As they prepared to secure the evidence, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. Marcus's heart skipped a beat as he reached for his gun. "Stay here," he told Barnes. "I'll check it out." He stepped into the corridor, his senses on high alert. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, followed by muffled voices. He moved cautiously, his gun raised, until he reached the source of the noise. A group of masked intruders was attempting to breach the secure evidence room. They were heavily armed and moving with precision. Marcus raised his weapon. "Freeze! Police!" The intruders turned, their guns trained on him. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, all hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted, the sound deafening in the confined space. Marcus ducked behind a pillar, returning fire as he called for backup. "Barnes, we got hostiles in the building. I need reinforcements now." The battle raged, bullets ricocheting off the walls. Marcus knew they couldn't let the intruders escape with the evidence, but he also knew they were outgunned and outnumbered. As the smoke thickened and the situation grew more dire, Marcus steeled himself. This fight wasn't just about him or his mother. It was about justice for Joshua Lewis, for his community, and for every victim of corruption and abuse. And he wasn't going down without a fight. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of gunpowder. Marcus ducked behind the pillar, his breathing steady but focused. Bullets zipped past, ricocheting off the walls with metallic clangs. He peeked around the corner and fired off 2 shots, forcing one of the masked intruders to retreat. Barnes's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Backup's en route, but we're still a few minutes out. Hold your position, Commissioner." "Understood," Marcus replied, his tone calm despite the chaos. He could hear the intruders shouting to each other, their voices muffled through their masks. They were regrouping, likely planning their next move. Marcus couldn't let them escape, not with the evidence they had just uncovered. Suddenly, a shadow moved in his peripheral vision. One of the intruders had flanked him, creeping closer with a silenced pistol. Marcus spun just in time, his instincts honed by years of training. He fired a single shot, hitting the intruder in the shoulder. The man crumpled with a grunt, his weapon skidding across the floor. Before Marcus could secure the injured man, another intruder charged at him. They grappled, the intruder's strength evident as they crashed against the wall. Marcus managed to twist free, delivering a sharp elbow to the attacker's ribs. The intruder stumbled, and Marcus used the moment to disarm him, sending the weapon clattering to the ground. The skirmish was far from over. More intruders advanced, their footsteps pounding against the tile floor. Marcus pressed his back against the wall, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Commissioner," Barnes's voice came through again. "They breached the west entrance. We got hostiles on multiple fronts." Marcus gritted his teeth. "We need to contain them. Have the reinforcements cut off their escape routes." "Already on it," Barnes said. As Marcus prepared for another wave of attackers, a loud bang echoed from the end of the hall. The building's main power cut out, plunging everything into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, casting the corridor in a dim red glow. The sudden shift gave the intruders an advantage. They moved swiftly, using the shadows to their benefit. Marcus could hear them, their movements calculated and precise. He fired at a figure darting toward the evidence room, but the shot missed. The intruder kicked open the door, and Marcus knew he had to act fast. He sprinted toward them, his gun raised. "Stop," he commanded. The intruder turned, raising their weapon, but before either could fire, a deafening boom shook the building. The floor beneath them trembled and chunks of debris rained down from the ceiling. Marcus lost his footing and hit the ground hard. Disoriented, he pushed himself up, his ears ringing. The intruders were retreating, using the confusion to their advantage. One of them shouted, "Fall back. We got what we need." Marcus's heart sank. They couldn't leave with the evidence. Summoning his strength, he pursued them through the smoke-filled corridors, firing at their retreating figures. Just as he reached the west entrance, backup finally arrived. SWAT officers stormed in, their rifles trained on the fleeing intruders. A firefight erupted, the deafening sound of gunfire echoing through the halls. One by one, the intruders were subdued. Some surrendered, realizing they were outmatched, while others fought until they were overwhelmed. Marcus focused on the last figure holding a satchel, likely containing the stolen evidence. "Drop the bag." Marcus shouted, his weapon trained on the intruder. The figure hesitated, then bolted toward the emergency exit. Marcus fired, aiming low. The shot hit its mark, striking the intruder in the leg. They stumbled and fell, the satchel sliding across the floor. SWAT officers moved in, securing the scene and apprehending the remaining suspects. Marcus retrieved the satchel, his hand steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. He unzipped it, confirming the evidence was still intact. Barnes appeared beside him, breathing heavily. "Looks like we got them." Marcus nodded, his face stern. "But this isn't over. These guys were just the muscle. We need to find out who sent them." As the intruders were escorted out in handcuffs, Marcus's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, expecting another threat. Instead, it was a message from an unknown number. "Nice save, Commissioner, but you're only delaying the inevitable." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. Whoever was orchestrating this was still out there, watching, waiting for their next move. He knew the fight was far from over. Later that morning, Marcus convened an emergency meeting with his most trusted officers. Barnes, Lopes from Cybercrimes, and a few others gathered in the secure conference room. "We've managed to keep this incident out of the public eye for now," Marcus began. "But it's only a matter of time before word gets out. We need to stay ahead of this." Lopes nodded. "We've been analyzing the intruders' gear. High-tech, military-grade equipment. They weren't your average criminals." "Which means someone with serious resources is backing them," Barnes added. Marcus leaned forward, his expression grim. "We need to focus on Reynolds and his connections. He's the key to unraveling this conspiracy." Lopes tapped on his laptop, bringing up a map of the city. "We've been tracking Reynolds' recent movements. He's been meeting with some interesting people, corporate executives, politicians, even a known arms dealer." Marcus studied the map. "Then, that's where we start. Bring Reynolds in for questioning, and dig deeper into his associates. I want names, locations, everything." Barnes nodded. "Consider it done." As the meeting concluded, Marcus felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. The night's events had taken a toll, but they had also strengthened his resolve. He wouldn't stop until every last person involved in the corruption was brought to justice. But as he prepared to leave, another thought lingered in his mind. The mysterious figure behind the threats was still out there, pulling strings from the shadows, and Marcus knew that the next move in this deadly game was coming sooner than he'd like. As he walked out of the conference room, his phone buzzed once more. This time the message was short but chilling. "See you soon, Commissioner." Marcus paused, his eyes narrowing. Whoever this was, they were getting bolder, and he was ready for them. The words "see you soon, Commissioner" lingered on Marcus's phone screen like a dark cloud. He locked the device and slipped it into his pocket, his mind already racing through the possibilities. Whoever was behind this had made their game personal, and Marcus was determined to end it on his terms. Barnes caught up with him as they walked down the hallway. "Sir, we got Reynolds in custody. He's in interrogation room 3. Marcus nodded. "Good. Let's see how much pressure it takes to make him talk." They entered the observation room adjacent to the interrogation room. Through the one-way glass, Marcus saw Reynolds sitting at the metal table, his hands cuffed in front of him. The deputy chief looked surprisingly calm, his face unreadable. "Any sign he's willing to cooperate?" Marcus asked. Barnes shook his head. "Not yet. He's playing it cool, but we've got enough to rattle him, especially after last night." Marcus watched Reynolds for a moment longer, then turned to Barnes. "I'll handle this one myself." Barnes opened the door, and Marcus stepped inside, the heavy metal door closing with a solid thud behind him. He sat across from Reynolds, his gaze unwavering. "Deputy Chief Reynolds," Marcus began, his tone cold. "I don't think we've ever had the pleasure of sitting down like this." Reynolds smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Cut the small talk, Carter. If you had anything concrete, I'd already be in a cell." Marcus placed the USB drive on the table, tapping it once. "This says otherwise. We got enough to bury you and everyone you've been protecting." Reynolds' smirk faltered for a split second before he composed himself. "You don't know what you're dealing with. There are people out there who won't let this go as far as you think. People like the ones who sent a hit squad to HQ last night." Marcus leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "They failed, and now we're coming for the rest of you." Reynolds' eyes narrowed. "You think you're a hero, Carter, but you're just another pawn in a game you don't understand." "Then help me understand," Marcus shot back. "Who's pulling the strings? Who ordered the cover-up on Joshua Lewis? Who's been sending the threats?" Reynolds stayed silent, his jaw tightening. Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You know what happens to people like you in prison, Reynolds?" Marcus said, his voice deceptively calm. "A high-ranking officer, part of a corruption ring. The other inmates won't care about your past connections. They'll see you as a prize." Reynolds' composure cracked slightly, a flicker of fear crossing his face. Marcus pressed on. "But if you cooperate, I can work with the DA to cut you a deal. Limited time and protective custody. Maybe even witness protection, if what you give us is valuable enough." Reynolds hesitated, his eyes flicking to the USB drive. He seemed to weigh his options, the gravity of his situation finally sinking in. "You're the one to know who's behind this," Reynolds said, his voice low. "That's why we're here," Marcus replied. Reynolds leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "There's a network, politicians, corporate execs, law enforcement. They'd operate in the shadows, pulling strings to protect their interests. Joshua Lewis stumbled onto something he shouldn't have, and they made him disappear." Marcus's stomach tightened. What did he find? Reynolds shook his head. "I don't know the details. All I know is that he was asking too many questions about a development project, something big tied to city contracts and funding. They couldn't risk it getting out." Before Marcus could probe further, Reynolds' expression darkened. "But if you think you're safe just because you've got me, you're wrong. They've already marked you, Carter, and they won't stop until you're out of the way." Marcus stood, his eyes cold. "Let them try. But make no mistake, Reynolds, you're going down, and I'm taking them with you." He knocked on the door, and Barnes opened it, stepping inside. "Take him back to his cell," Marcus ordered. Reynolds was escorted out, his calm demeanor replaced with a grim resignation. Once the door closed behind him, Barnes turned to Marcus. "That development project you mentioned," Barnes said. "We got to dig into it." Marcus nodded. "Have Lopez and her team start pulling records, permits, contracts, anything related to large-scale projects in the city. We need to know what Joshua Lewis found." Later that afternoon, Marcus returned to his office, his mind still racing. Every piece of the puzzle brought them closer to the truth, but it also made the stakes higher. Whoever was behind this network wasn't just powerful, they were ruthless. He sat down at his desk and opened his laptop, reviewing the files from the USB drive again. As he scrolled through the documents, a particular name caught his attention: Horizon Development Group. It was a company listed as a contractor on multiple city projects, including infrastructure and housing developments. Marcus frowned. The name seemed familiar, but he couldn't place it. He searched the company's name in their internal database, and a series of reports popped up. Most were routine permits, inspections, financial records. But one file was flagged, a complaint filed 6 months ago by a whistleblower within the company. Marcus opened the file, his eyes narrowing as he read. The whistleblower, an accountant named Victor Hughes, had reported irregularities in the company's financial records. Funds were being funneled into shell corporations, and large sums were unaccounted for. Joshua Lewis had been looking into a development project. Could this be connected? Just as Marcus was piecing it together, his phone buzzed. It was Barnes. "Commissioner, we've got a problem," Barnes said, his voice tense. "What is it?" Marcus asked. "Victor Hughes," Barnes replied. "He was found dead this morning. Apparent suicide." Marcus's blood ran cold. Another loose end tied up. "Do we have any evidence suggesting it wasn't suicide?" "Not yet," Barnes said, "but I've already sent a team to investigate. If there's anything suspicious, we'll find it." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Hughes was their best lead, and now he was gone. But his whistleblower report might still hold the key. "We'll keep pushing," Marcus said. "This network has made one thing clear. They'll stop at nothing to protect themselves. But we're not stopping either." Barnes hesitated. "Sir, we're getting close to something big, but it also means they'll come after us harder." Marcus nodded. "Let them. We've come too far to back down now." But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the feeling that the next move in this deadly game was imminent. And when it came, it would test everything he had. That night, as Marcus prepared to leave the station, his phone buzzed once more. Another message from the unknown number. "You've poked the bear, Commissioner. Now, the claws come out." Marcus stared at the message, his jaw tightening. He knew the storm was coming, and he would have to be ready for whatever came next. The message, "You've poked the bear, Commissioner. Now, the claws come out," played over in Marcus's mind as he drove home. The city lights blurred past him, their glow a stark contrast to the darkness of the night's events. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his mind racing through the possible implications. He arrived at his mother's house, parking a few houses down. It was a precaution he had taken since the threats began. He walked the short distance, scanning the area as he approached the front door. Everything seemed quiet, but Marcus knew better than to let his guard down. When he stepped inside, the warmth of home greeted him. Mrs. Carter was seated in her favorite chair, knitting as the soft hum of jazz music filled the room. "Marcus," she said, her face lighting up as she saw him. "I didn't expect you this late." "I wanted to check in," Marcus replied, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "How are you feeling?" "I'm fine," she said, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of worry. "But I'm more concerned about you. You look exhausted." Marcus smiled faintly. "It's been a long day." He sat across from her, the weight of the day settling on his shoulders. For a brief moment, the world outside felt distant, and he allowed himself to relax. But the respite was short-lived. A sudden sound outside, a faint but distinct crunch of gravel, snapped Marcus back into alertness. He glanced toward the window, his senses on high alert. "Stay here," he told his mother quietly, rising to his feet. He moved toward the door, his hand instinctively resting on the gun holstered at his side. He peered through the peephole but saw nothing. Slowly he unlocked the door and stepped outside, his eyes scanning the street. The cool night air was still, but Marcus knew someone had been there. "Marcus," his mother called softly from inside. "It's okay, Mom," he said, his voice steady. "Stay inside and lock the door." He walked the perimeter of the house, his footsteps silent on the gravel. As he rounded the corner to the backyard, a shadow moved, quick and deliberate. Marcus drew his weapon, his voice firm. "Stop, police." The figure froze for a moment, then bolted toward the fence. Marcus gave chase, his heart pounding. The intruder was fast, vaulting over the fence with practiced ease. Marcus followed, landing on the other side with a thud. The chase continued down the alley, the faint glow of streetlights guiding their path. Marcus closed the distance, his focus razor-sharp. But just as he was about to catch up, the intruder veered into a narrow passage between two buildings. Marcus skidded to a stop at the entrance, his weapon raised. The passage was dark, the faint outline of the figure barely visible at the other end. "Come out with your hands up," Marcus commanded. For a moment, there was silence. Then a voice called out from the shadows, calm and mocking. "You're tenacious, Commissioner. I'll give you that." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Who are you? Why are you here?" The figure stepped closer, just enough for Marcus to make out a mask covering their face. "Consider this a warning," the intruder said. "Back off, or the next time, it won't just be a visit." Before Marcus could respond, the figure raised their hand, tossing something onto the ground. A sudden flash of light and smoke erupted, blinding Marcus momentarily. When the smoke cleared, the intruder was gone. Coughing, Marcus emerged from the passage, scanning the area. The streets were empty, the silence oppressive. He holstered his weapon, his mind racing. This wasn't just a random scare tactic. They wanted him to know they could get close, even to his family. He made his way back to his mother's house, every sense on high alert. When he arrived, he found Mrs. Carter waiting by the window, her face pale with worry. "Marcus, what happened?" she asked as he stepped inside. "Just someone trying to scare us," he said, doing his best to sound reassuring. "But they're gone now." Mrs. Carter frowned. "This is getting dangerous, Marcus. Maybe it's time to step back." Marcus shook his head. "I can't, Mom. If I stop now, they'll think they've won, and people like them, they don't stop unless someone makes them." Mrs. Carter sighed, her eyes filled with both pride and concern. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I will," Marcus said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "But I need you to do something for me too. Don't go anywhere without letting me know first, and keep the doors locked at all times." Mrs. Carter nodded. "I'll do that." As the night stretched on, Marcus sat in the living room, reviewing the files on Horizon Development Group. The more he read, the clearer it became that this company was at the center of everything. The shell corporations, the missing funds, the sudden death of the whistleblower. It all pointed to a larger conspiracy. But one document caught his attention. A contract involving Horizon and a powerful real estate mogul named Charles Whitmore. Whitmore was known for his aggressive business tactics and deep connections in both the political and corporate worlds. Marcus's instincts told him Whitmore was more than just a contractor. He was a key player in the network Reynolds had hinted at. He made a call to Barnes. "Barnes, I've got a lead. We need to look into Charles Whitmore." "Whitmore?" Barnes replied, his voice surprised. "He's a big fish, Commissioner. If he's involved, this goes higher than we thought." "Exactly," Marcus said. "Start digging into his financials, his contracts, anything that ties him to Verizon or Reynolds, and keep it quiet. If Whitmore's connected, he'll have eyes everywhere. Understood, Barnes said. I'll get on it right away. As Marcus ended the call, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The pieces were coming together, but he knew the most dangerous players were still in the shadows. And now they were watching his every move. The next confrontation was inevitable, and Marcus was ready. But deep down, he knew that the closer he got to the truth, the higher the stakes would become. He just didn't realize how high they were about to get. The next morning, Marcus arrived at police headquarters with a steely determination. The events of the previous night were fresh in his mind. The masked intruder, the chilling threat, the constant reminders that his enemies were always one step ahead. But he wasn't about to back down. Barnes met him at the entrance, a thick folder tucked under his arm. "Commissioner, we got something," he said, leading Marcus to his office. Once inside, Barnes spread the contents of the folder across the desk. "We dug into Charles Whitmore's financials and found several discrepancies. He's funneled millions into offshore accounts, and some of that money traces back to Verizon Development Group." Marcus scanned the documents. "Any connections to Joshua Lewis?" Barnes nodded, indirectly. Verizon was involved in a housing project that Joshua was investigating before his disappearance. The project was supposed to revitalize low-income neighborhoods, but most of the funds vanished and the project stalled. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Whitmore was using Verizon as a front to launder money. "Exactly," Barnes said, "and we found something else. Joshua wasn't just investigating financial fraud. He uncovered plans to displace entire communities under the guise of development." Marcus's jaw tightened. They were planning to push people out of their homes to make way for luxury developments. Barnes nodded grimly, and when Joshua started asking questions, he became a threat. Marcus leaned back in his chair, piecing it all together. Whitmore and his network had everything to gain from silencing Joshua, and now they were trying to cover their tracks by eliminating anyone who got too close. "Barnes," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We need to bring Whitmore in for questioning." Barnes hesitated. "You sure about that? He's got powerful allies. If we make a move too soon, it could backfire." "We don't have a choice," Marcus said. "If we wait, more people will die. Back off or the next time. It won't just be a visit." Before Marcus could respond, the figure raised their hand, tossing something onto the ground. A sudden flash of light and smoke erupted, blinding Marcus momentarily. When the smoke cleared, the intruder was gone. Coughing, Marcus emerged from the passage, scanning the area. The streets were empty, the silence oppressive. He holstered his weapon, his mind racing. This wasn't just a random scare tactic. They wanted him to know they could get close, even to his family. He made his way back to his mother's house, every sense on high alert. When he arrived, he found Mrs. Carter waiting by the window, her face pale with worry. "Marcus, what happened?" she asked as he stepped inside. "Just someone trying to scare us," he said, doing his best to sound reassuring. "But they're gone now." Mrs. Carter frowned. "This is getting dangerous, Marcus. Maybe it's time to step back." Marcus shook his head. "I can't, Mom. If I stop now, they'll think they've won, and people like them, they don't stop unless someone makes them." Mrs. Carter sighed, her eyes filled with both pride and concern. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I will," Marcus said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "But I need you to do something for me too. Don't go anywhere without letting me know first, and keep the doors locked at all times." Mrs. Carter nodded. "I'll do that." As the night stretched on, Marcus sat in the living room, reviewing the files on Verizon Development Group. The more he read, the clearer it became that this company was at the center of everything. The shell corporations, the missing funds, the sudden death of the whistleblower. It all pointed to a larger conspiracy. But one document caught his attention. A contract involving Verizon and a powerful real estate mogul named Charles Whitmore. Whitmore was known for his aggressive business tactics and deep connections in both the political and corporate worlds. Marcus's instincts told him Whitmore was more than just a contractor. He was a key player in the network Reynolds had hinted at. He made a call to Barnes. "Barnes, I've got a lead. We need to look into Charles Whitmore." "Whitmore?" Barnes replied, his voice surprised. "He's a big fish, Commissioner. If he's involved, this goes higher than we thought." "Exactly," Marcus said. "Start digging into his financials, his contracts, anything that ties him to Verizon or Reynolds, and keep it quiet. If Whitmore's connected, he'll have eyes everywhere." "Understood," Barnes said. "I'll get on it right away." As Marcus ended the call, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The pieces were coming together, But he knew the most dangerous players were still in the shadows, and now they were watching his every move. The next confrontation was inevitable, and Marcus was ready. But deep down, he knew that the closer he got to the truth, the higher the stakes would become. He just didn't realize how high they were about to get. The next morning, Marcus arrived at police headquarters with a steely determination. The events of the previous night were fresh in his mind. The masked intruder, the chilling threat, the constant reminders that his enemies were always one step ahead. But he wasn't about to back down. Barnes met him at the entrance, a thick folder tucked under his arm. "Commissioner, we got something," he said, leading Marcus to his office. Once inside, Barnes spread the contents of the folder across the desk. "We dug into Charles Whitmore's financials and found several discrepancies. He's funneled millions into offshore accounts, and some of that money traces back to Horizon Development Group." Marcus scanned the documents. "Any connections to Joshua Lewis?" Barnes nodded, indirectly. Horizon was involved in a housing project that Joshua was investigating before his disappearance. The project was supposed to revitalize low-income neighborhoods, but most of the funds vanished and the project stalled. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Whitmore was using Horizon as a front to launder money. "Exactly," Barnes said, "and we found something else. Joshua wasn't just investigating financial fraud. He uncovered plans to displace entire communities under the guise of development." Marcus's jaw tightened. They were planning to push people out of their homes to make way for luxury developments. Barnes nodded grimly, and when Joshua started asking questions, he became a threat. Marcus leaned back in his chair, piecing it all together. Whitmore and his network had everything to gain from silencing Joshua, and now they were trying to cover their tracks by eliminating anyone who got too close. "Barnes," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We need to bring Whitmore in for questioning." Barnes hesitated. "You sure about that? He's got powerful allies. If we make a move too soon, it could backfire." "We don't have a choice," Marcus said. "If we wait, more people will die." "Looks like he's heading to the penthouse suite," Lopes replied. "We've hacked into the hotel's security feed. He's meeting someone up there." Marcus exchanged a look with Barnes. "We can't wait. Let's move." Inside the hotel, Marcus and a small tactical team ascended to the top floor. The hallway leading to the penthouse was eerily quiet. Marcus signaled for the team to stop just outside the suite. Barnes whispered, "You think they'll come quietly?" Marcus smirked. "Not a chance." He nodded to the officer holding the breaching tool. With a loud crash, the door flew open, and the team stormed in, weapons raised. Inside, Whitmore was seated at a luxurious table, his briefcase open in front of him. Across from him sat a man Marcus recognized immediately, Richard Langston, a high-ranking city official with deep ties to the business elite. Langston's face twisted in shock, but he quickly masked it with indignation. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Marcus ignored him, his focus on Whitmore. "Hands where I can see them, both of you." Whitmore complied, his expression resigned. Langston hesitated, but the sight of multiple weapons trained on him made him raise his hands. Marcus approached the table, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at the briefcase. Inside were stacks of documents and a sleek encrypted laptop. Well, Marcus said, pulling on gloves as he carefully removed a file. "What do we have here?" Langston scowled. "You're overstepping your authority, Carter. This is a private meeting." "Save it," Marcus snapped. "You're both under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice." Barnes began securing the laptop, while the rest of the team cuffed Whitmore and Langston. But as Marcus flipped through the documents, a troubling pattern emerged: blueprints, contracts, and financial statements tied to projects all over the city, each one connected to Horizon Development Group. One document in particular caught his attention: Project Unity. "Barnes," Marcus said, holding up the file. "Have you seen this before?" Barnes shook his head. "What is it?" Marcus scanned the document. It outlined plans for a massive redevelopment initiative, but the language was vague. It mentioned terms like urban renewal and economic revitalization, but the financial breakdown told a different story. Entire neighborhoods were to be acquired and razed, with residents forced out under eminent domain. "This isn't renewal," Marcus said grimly. "It's displacement on a massive scale." Langston sneered. "You're meddling in things you don't understand, Commissioner. Project Unity is about progress." "Progress," Marcus repeated, his voice cold. "You're destroying communities for profit." Whitmore finally spoke, his voice low. "You think you've won, but this is bigger than you. Shut us down and someone else will take our place. Marcus leaned in close, his eyes like steel. Let them try. As Whitmore and Langston were escorted out, Marcus and Barnes returned to headquarters with the seized evidence. Lopes was already working on decrypting the laptop. This could blow the whole network wide open, Barnes said as they entered the tech lab. Lopes nodded. Give me a couple of hours. If there's anything incriminating on here, I'll find it. Marcus turned to Barnes. Double the security around the building. They'll come after this evidence. Barnes didn't hesitate. Consider it done. By nightfall, the tension in headquarters was palpable. Marcus paced his office, reviewing the files from the briefcase while keeping an eye on updates from Lopez. Finally, a notification pinged on his computer. It was Lopez. Commissioner, her voice came through the intercom. You need to see this. Marcus hurried to the tech lab. Lopes pointed to the laptop screen, which displayed a series of encrypted communications between Langston Whitmore and several anonymous accounts. This is it, Lopes said. They've been coordinating Project Unity through secured channels. But look at this. She clicked on a folder labeled Contingencies. Inside were detailed plans for eliminating threats. Whistleblowers, journalists, even law enforcement. Marcus's heart sank as he saw his own name on the list, along with Barnes and Lopez. They've been planning to take us out, Lopes said, her voice uneasy. Marcus straightened, his resolve hardening. Not if we take them down first. Just then, an alert flashed across Lopes's screen. What the? Barnes, who had just entered, asked, What's going on? Lopez's face paled. We're being hacked. Someone's trying to wipe the laptop remotely. Marcus cursed. Cut the connection. Lopez's fingers flew across the keyboard, but the files began disappearing one by one. I'm trying, but they're fast. Marcus thought quickly. Can you copy anything before it's gone? I'll try, Lopes said, opening a secure backup. But just as she initiated the transfer, the screen went black. Lopes slammed her fist on the desk. They got to it. Marcus clenched his fists. What did we lose? Almost everything, Lopes said, her voice heavy. But I managed to save the contingencies folder. It's not much, but it's enough to keep us moving. Barnes sighed. They're covering their tracks, but this proves we're getting to them. Marcus nodded. And now, they'll come for us harder than ever. He looked at the contingencies folder, his jaw set. We've got what we need to fight back, but we need to move fast before they strike again. As the night deepened, Marcus knew they were nearing the endgame. The stakes had never been higher, and the cost of failure was unthinkable. But he was ready to see it through, no matter what it took. The air in headquarters was heavy with tension. Marcus stood in the center of the operations room, surrounded by his most trusted officers. The contingencies folder sat on the large screen, its contents chilling, a hit list, detailed surveillance reports, and communication logs of covered operations to eliminate threats. Marcus pointed to the screen. This is all we've got left, but it's enough to expose the key players. Our next move is critical. Barnes stepped forward. We've identified some of the anonymous accounts. They're linked to high-profile figures, politicians, corporate executives, and even a few law enforcement officials. Whitmore and Langston were just the middlemen. Marcus nodded. Good, but we need more than names. We need to catch them in the act. Lopez, seated at a nearby terminal, chimed in. I've been tracking their encrypted communications. There's chatter about a meeting tomorrow night. It's happening at a private estate outside the city. Barnes frowned. They'll be heavily guarded. Which is why we're going in with a full team, Marcus said. This is our chance to take them down before they can regroup. Lopez added, I'll keep monitoring their communications. If they try to pull anything, we'll know. Marcus turned to his team, his voice firm. This is it. We're not just taking down a network. We're dismantling an empire of corruption. But make no mistake, these people are dangerous. They won't go down without a fight. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the gravity of the situation. Then, one by one, the officers nodded, their determination evident. We're with you, Commissioner, Barnes said. The following night, the team gathered near the private estate. It was a sprawling property surrounded by high walls and patrolled by armed guards. Marcus, clad in tactical gear, surveyed the scene through binoculars. Lopes, are we clear on comms? He asked. Crystal clear, Lopes replied over the earpiece. Their security system is sophisticated, but I've managed to bypass it. You've got a 10-minute window before they notice. Understood, Marcus said. Let's move. The team split into two groups. Marcus led the first group toward the main entrance while Barnes and the second group circled around to the back. As they approached the gate, Marcus signaled to an officer who swiftly disabled the security panel. The gate slid open silently, and the team slipped inside. The estate was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hum of generators. Marcus gestured for his team to advance, their movements precise and silent. They reached the main building, a grand mansion with large windows and a sweeping staircase leading to the front doors. Marcus held up his hand, signaling for the team to halt. "Lopez," Marcus whispered. "What's the status inside?" Lopez's voice crackled in his earpiece. "I'm seeing multiple heat signatures on the second floor. Looks like your targets are in a meeting room at the end of the hallway." Marcus nodded. "Barnes, take your team and secure the perimeter. We'll handle the meeting room." "Copy that," Barnes replied. Marcus led his group through the front doors, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. They moved quickly but cautiously, clearing each room as they advanced toward the second floor. When they reached the staircase, Marcus gestured for two officers to cover their rear. He ascended the stairs, his weapon at the ready, his heart pounding in anticipation. At the top of the stairs, they encountered two guards stationed outside the meeting room. Before the guards could react, Marcus's team subdued them, rendering them unconscious without firing a shot. Marcus signaled for his team to stack up by the door. He counted down silently, 3, 2, 1, and then they breached. Inside, the room was filled with men and women seated around a long table, their faces a mix of shock and fury as Marcus and his team burst in. At the head of the table sat Charles Whitmore, who had been released on bail, and Richard Langston, who somehow managed to secure his own freedom just hours before. "You're all under arrest," Marcus announced, his voice steady but commanding, "for conspiracy, corruption, and obstruction of justice." Whitmore stood slowly, his smirk returning. "Commissioner Carter, you certainly have a flair for the dramatic." Langston scoffed. "You won't get away with this. We have lawyers, connections. You're just making a spectacle." Marcus stepped closer, his eyes locked on Whitmore. "This isn't a spectacle. It's the end of your little empire." Whitmore chuckled, but before he could respond, Lopez's voice came through Marcus's earpiece. "Commissioner, I'm picking up chatter. Reinforcements are on their way." "They never there." Marcus cursed under his breath. "How long do we have?" 5 minutes, maybe less," Lopez said. "You need to move." Marcus turned to his team. "Secure everyone here and get them out. Now." As his officers began cuffing the suspects, Marcus stepped back into the hallway. Barnes's voice came through the comms. "We've got movement on the perimeter. Multiple vehicles approaching fast." "Hold them off as long as you can," Marcus said. "We're extracting the targets now." Marcus re-entered the meeting room, helping his team escort the suspects down the stairs. As they reached the ground floor, the sound of gunfire erupted outside. Barnes's voice was tense. "We're under heavy fire. They've got automatic weapons." Marcus gritted his teeth. "Lopez, get us an extraction route." "Working on it," Lopez said. "There's a side exit leading to a service road. I'm sending the coordinates now." Marcus led the group toward the side exit, his weapon raised. They burst through the door and into the night, moving quickly toward the service road. "Keep moving," Marcus shouted as bullets whizzed past them. Finally, they reached the service road, where an armored van was waiting. Officers hurriedly loaded the suspects inside as Barnes and his team provided cover fire. Once everyone was inside, Marcus climbed into the van, slamming the door shut. "Go, go." The van sped off, tires screeching as it navigated the narrow road. Marcus looked back through the rear window, watching as their attackers faded into the distance. Barnes, seated next to him, let out a heavy sigh. That was too close. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. "But we got them. And now, it's time to finish this." As the van made its way back to headquarters, Marcus knew the fight wasn't over. The people behind this network would regroup, and the next battle would be even more dangerous. But with Whitmore, Langston, and their associates in custody, Marcus finally had the leverage he needed to dismantle the corruption for good. The end game was near. The armored van screeched to a halt inside the secure underground garage at headquarters. Officers moved swiftly, escorting Charles Whitmore, Richard Langston, and the other detainees out under heavy guard. Marcus and Barnes stepped out, their faces grim but resolute. "Lock them down," Marcus ordered. "Maximum security. No communication with the outside world." As the suspects were led away, Barnes turned to Marcus. "We got them, but you know this isn't over. Their allies will retaliate." "I'm counting on it," Marcus replied, his voice cold. "We've shaken the foundation of their network, and they'll make mistakes trying to recover." They headed to the operations center where Lopes was waiting, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Commissioner, we've decrypted more files from the contingencies folder. There's enough here to implicate several high-ranking officials and corporate executives." Marcus studied the screen. Names, bank transfers, and detailed plans for coercion and elimination lit up the monitors. This wasn't just a local operation. It was a sprawling web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of power. "How fast can we push this to the DA's office?" Marcus asked. Lopes glanced up. "I've already prepared the files. They'll have everything they need by morning." "Good," Marcus said. "Make sure they're ready for the media fallout. Once this goes public, the city will demand answers." Barnes folded his arms. "You think the DA will move quickly enough? These people have influence. They'll try to bury it." "They won't get the chance," Marcus said. "We'll make it impossible for them to cover this up." Hours later, Marcus stood in the briefing room, addressing a group of trusted officers. The weight of the past weeks was evident in their faces, but so was their determination. "Today, we took down key players in one of the most corrupt networks this city has ever seen," Marcus began. "But this is just the beginning. We have a duty to see this through, no matter the cost." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "I won't lie to you. The people we're up against are powerful, and they'll stop at nothing to protect themselves. But we have the truth on our side, and that makes us stronger." The room was silent, each officer absorbing the gravity of his words. Marcus continued, "We'll face resistance, from both outside and within. But if we stand together, we can dismantle this system of corruption and restore trust in our department." As he finished, the room erupted in quiet applause, a show of solidarity and resolve. Later that night, Marcus sat alone in his office, the city lights twinkling through the window. He knew the next few days would be critical. The media would catch wind of the arrests, and the public would demand accountability. Meanwhile, the remaining members of the network would do everything in their power to retaliate. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a text from Barnes. "Press conference scheduled for tomorrow morning. Time to put the truth out there." Marcus replied, "Understood. Let's make it count." He leaned back in his chair, his mind briefly drifting to his mother. She had always been his anchor, and her strength had kept him grounded throughout this ordeal. He made a mental note to visit her once things settled down. As he closed his eyes for a moment of rest, another message came through from an unknown number. "You played your part well, Commissioner, but the game isn't over." Marcus stared at the screen, his resolve hardening. Whoever was behind these threats was still out there, watching and waiting for their next move. The next morning, Marcus stood behind a podium in front of a packed room of reporters. Cameras flashed, and the hum of whispered conversations filled the air. Behind him, a large screen displayed images of the evidence seized from Whitmore and Langston. He took a deep breath and began. "Last night, the police department executed a successful operation, resulting in the arrest of individuals involved in a widespread corruption network. These individuals abused their power to exploit communities, launder money, and silence those who stood in their way." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. "Our investigation has uncovered connections to high-ranking officials and influential business leaders," Marcus continued. "We have already provided this evidence to the district attorney's office, and we expect swift legal action." A reporter raised her hand. "Commissioner, can you confirm if this network is tied to the disappearance of Joshua Lewis?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, Joshua Lewis was investigating one of their projects and became a target. We are committed to finding the truth about his disappearance and holding those responsible accountable." Another reporter asked, "Are you concerned about retaliation?" Marcus's gaze was steady. "These people have operated in the shadows for too long. They may try to fight back, but we will not be intimidated. This department stands united in its mission to protect this city and uphold the law." As the press conference concluded, Marcus stepped away from the podium, his heart pounding. He knew the battle was far from over, but this was a turning point, a chance to shine a light on the darkness that had plagued the city for years. Barnes approached, a faint smile on his face. "You did good, Marcus. The city needed to hear that." Marcus nodded. "Now, we see how the rest of the pieces fall." That evening, as Marcus prepared to leave headquarters, his phone buzzed once more. Another unknown message. "You may have won this round, Commissioner, but the war is far from over. We'll be watching." Marcus pocketed the phone, his expression unyielding. The fight wasn't over, but he was ready for whatever came next. He stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of the day lifting slightly. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a moment of hope. The city was still standing, and so was he. And as long as he had breath in his lungs, he would keep fighting.